Okay, so the third brain bug is not taking full responsibility for how we've wounded and hurt those we love. Just an easy, simple one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, I see this as an area where we can become overly behavior focused, that we feel like, well, I did things that hurt my spouse, kids, friends, whatever, and now I'm not doing those things. Look how much better I am, and so you should be better too. And we assume that it's just the presence of the behavior that hurt them. So now in the absence of the behavior, everything's okay. And yet we're maybe missing that there's still some safety issues they need to work through, or trauma that we've created, or trust issues that rebuilding that, when we say that recovery is a 3 to 5 year process, and we say this all the time, we don't mean that stopping the behavior is 3 to 5 years, but that long-term relational recovery is actually the slowest and last piece to come fully around. So you might be a full year into sobriety and no acting out, and you feel like your spouse, it's still like the first week, and you're like, well, what the heck? I'm not acting out. But you're missing that the pain that's caused is a significant relational fracture, and it may take more than you think, and it may take things that are different than you think to really heal. And so I think it's part of the humility that can come in recovery, that we don't want to beat ourselves up over that. Like, man, look what I've did. I'm a terrible person, because it can become another reason for shame.
Totally.
But to take ownership of, man, I remember the mantra I used to tell myself was like, I caused this in our marriage, and I need to continue to help work it out no matter how long it takes. And if at 2 years, there's something my wife still needs for me to address, I've got to be open to that, because I caused that pain. I created those trust issues. I remember it was something in my 3 circles that there was a guardrail there, that because it had been a couple of years, I was like, I think I'm good to go. And then I'd crossed a guardrail, not in anything sexual, but just creating a trust issue with my wife. And she was very angry. And I was like, well, what the heck? I'm doing so good. And, and she was like, these are your guardrails. Like, you agreed to them. And when I see you break them, it hurts our trust. And it was kind of a reminder, like, oh yeah, even though we were 2 years into really successful recovery, it didn't mean her heart was just now resilient to any kind of, flippant decision I made. So I think it's just that willingness to take ownership and to take that long view to say, I will work on this as long as it takes. And many of us say that in the first month, like, I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. But if at 18 months or 2 years or 4 years, they're still not trusting us, we forget that statement. And maybe we need to tell ourselves again, you know what, I said I would do whatever it takes. And if we're at year 3 and she still needs my help, or he still needs to earn my trust again, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Nick, because I'm just thinking of, I can't even tell you how many phone calls I get with guys saying, I'm doing so good and my wife is not here yet, or she's just not at that level. And I really hope that the guys that are watching this really pay attention to that, because oftentimes they get so frustrated with their wives. It's like I'm trying to calm them down and say, listen, she may not be at the level for you for quite some time, but that doesn't mean your recovery has to stop. And then, because a lot of times they get into like blaming them because now they're angry with them because they feel that their wives should be at this certain level. And like you said, even in the first couple of weeks, I'm like, sorry, man, it may take her a year or so to get there, or longer. And so for some gals, they don't really ever get to that point where they can fully trust again. It's a process, but I think the guys have to I tell them to just kind of pump the brakes on putting pressure on them, because the more pressure you put on them, it really becomes this like, well, look at me now. So it's like performance instead of actually taking ownership. I'm doing this because I got caught. It's like, no, you're doing this because you need to do this and go through it for yourself. And so they have this performance, hey, look at me now. And their wives don't want to see performance. They want to just see true healing take place and not a bunch of fancy words.
It's interesting. So part of my story, I didn't bring addiction. Like, I had started recovery before I got married. And so we didn't have like a huge, discovery moment. But just even recently, like within the last year, I have gotten into cocktails, just like making them. I like the mixology piece of it. And there've been multiple times where my wife will and I have like a plan, right? Like how many nights a week that I can do it and how many drinks. And so I have a plan. But I noticed there are some times where I didn't follow the plan. And even though like it didn't play out in my marriage, my sexual addiction, we had this big blow up, we've had multiple conversations where she's like, when I see you like make a plan and then you don't follow it, that makes me nervous. Like you were an addict in this area.
That's
and
big.
even though it's not sexual, it's still, you know, addiction. And so I think that we also need to expand our view of this, of like the carryover effect of our sexual addiction may fall in other areas. Like it could be, you know, how often you exercise. It could be your use of alcohol. It could be food. It could be the way you treat your kids. Like thinking not just in that sexual area, but also like your being an addict, like communicates a lot about habits and whether you can earn trust. And so it's just interesting, you know, that I would just say in relationship that if you are able to like create habits, create goals, create guidelines for how you're doing things in life and follow those, even if they're not in the sexual realm, that still does build trust in this area.
And it's helpful to keep in mind what Harry Flanagan says in the 7 Pillars of Freedom about his story, that I am not responsible for the choices they make because of their pain, that's where they have to take ownership. But I do still need to be responsible for the pain I've caused and the hurt and the fracture in the relationship. And so I think that's an important distinction, that we're not trying to tell people that if your spouse is flying off the handle and throwing things and saying, you know, outrageous things like, well, that's all my fault. It's like, okay, the anger that I've caused is legit, but how they're using that anger I'm not responsible for that. So we want to take ownership that it's caused pain, that pain may take longer to work through than we think, but then also have some healthy separation, that I can only control what I can control.
Yep.